This screencast is going to be a walkthrough of nixos-containers, a feature that was recently added and is included in the 14.04 release of nixos. So if you look at the manual, there's a description and it gives a good overview of what you can do. Actually, you probably don't need to know any more about containers than what's in the manual, but I thought it'd be nice to just have a walkthrough to show how you can use it and how I plan to use it. So as it says, they're containers allow you to easily run other NixOS instances. So they're a lightweight approach to virtualization, and you can run software in the container at the same speed as the host system. NixOS containers share the Nix store of the host, making container creation very efficient. So this is great because I've been using a virtual machine for development, and NixOS already has support for deploying to virtual machines with NixOps, for example, or you can even do the Nix build VM, and you can do something similar to what we can do now with containers, but of course then you are restricting the amount of RAM that you have available, and it's also a lot heavier, the virtualization. So NixOS containers are actually systemd-nspawn containers. So it's not LXC, but it's, so I hadn't actually heard of these until I heard of NixOS containers, but it's something like chroot, but it's part of systemd. So you also have access to all the systemd stuff, so you can access the journal for logging, and you can control them from the host system with system control. So that makes it quite nice, and yeah, it's very efficient. So just to jump back to the manual, there's two main types of containers. You can create them imperatively or declaratively, and actually, even though like the big deal about NixOS is that you have declarative configuration for everything, I'm going to show a kind of a mix of the two, where I use a configuration.nix file to configure the particular container, and but I create it imperatively, and I'll explain why I like that approach, and I'll just show an example of how to set up a container with OpenSSH, how to log into it, how to add some services such as Apache and Postgres, and how to set up a MediaWiki instance, because I think that will kind of cover the basics. If you're already familiar with NixOS, I think it will probably be pretty straightforward. I'll assume that you're familiar enough with the general idea of the system anyway. I won't try to explain the basics of NixOS or systemd or anything like that. So let's get going. The first thing I would like to do is, well, let's just have a look at what you get in nixos-container. It's a command in itself. So you can list the ones you have: create, destroy, start, stop, login, root, login, run, and yeah. So I'm going to create one. So create, I'll call it screencast. The IP address it's going to have. So that's created one. It hasn't actually started it yet. So start it up. And I'll just show that you can see this from systemd. So the status, you can see it like this. Okay, so that looks good. And yeah, so that's like, so it's running this contained, very simplified instance, the default container. So let's log in. I'll do a root login. So now I'm logged in to the container. Actually, I'll just use a different screen for that, just to kind of try to make it clear when I'm in the container and when I'm on the host system. I'll use this darker theme for the container. Okay, so now, for example, if I list the units, you see there's only a few things running. We have the firewall enabled and just some basic services, the default stuff. This is you get a default configuration.nix in etc configuration.nix. So very simple. Now, I mentioned before that I use kind of a mixture of declarative and imperative. So I've created this, like the other option, just to show you, is the declarative container. This basically means that in your nixos, your configuration.nix, you define your containers there, so you can already set up the networking and services and stuff like that. But I'm going to use a separate configuration.nix for my container today. So to do that, I think it's handy to bind mount a directory on the host, because I keep all my nixos configuration files in one repository so that I can share common bits between them. So this is my configuration.nix essentially on for this particular machine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bind mount a directory to the container. So here you can see the when you create a container, it creates a directory in varlib containers for that particular one, and that's essentially the root file system for this. And what I want to do is I want to bind mount my personal configuration into etc nixos-config. Okay, so note I am in my host system as root, and I will rebuild that. So this is essentially the same as editing fs tab and adding another mount point. So if I do, you can see here that if I run mount, I have this mounted. And if we look, let's just open the container above. So in here, I can see now that in etc nixos, I have the config directory. And okay, now back on my host system as my normal user, this is where I have all my config stuff. So the idea is that, like, as my normal user, I can do much of the development. I can edit files on the local file system. I don't need to use SSH or NFS or something to access. This was kind of a pain with virtual machines to share directories. There's ways you can do it as well with, yeah, this is much easier, I think. So I'm just going to create a new directory for this one, call it screencast, and then I want to copy over the default. So let me do that. Okay, and I might as well change the ownership on that as well. So this is my username and home. There we go. So this is the same file that we were just looking at from the container. And now I'm just going to flesh that out a bit and start adding some stuff. So let me open that. Here again, I'm using the darker theme. I am actually on the host system here, but this is editing the config for the container, so I hope that makes it a little bit clearer. So the first thing I want to do is disable the firewall, because I really don't need that. Actually, I can tidy this up a little bit. It's just nice to use an attribute set like this. Again, you're probably familiar with this if you've used NixOS already. So that's the firewall disabled. I want to let's add an open SSH. So I'll do a section for services. Again, I'm going to add more, so I'll just use an attribute set. That's open SSH. Okay, that's it. And I would also like to add a user. So I'll use the declarative user config. I'll set mutable users to true so that I can adjust things like the group settings via this config file. And because I'm going to add a MediaWiki instance, I'll just call the user MW. I want to create a home directory. Yeah, I'll set the home. This is actually a string rather than a path, I think. And description, don't know if you really need that. And I'll add this user to the wheel group so that they can use sudo. And I also want to set the same UUID as my default user on the host machine, because it's just easy to manage permissions and stuff like that. Use the default shell. Yeah, now there's another setting that's pretty handy. You can set a SSH key that's like already authorized. So yeah, so this is the same as like adding that account. You could do SSH copy ID, I think is the normal command you would use to do that. So here I can already define it in the configuration file. It's pretty nice. And now I'll just, I think that's everything. Oops. Let me just check. Yep. That should do it. That should be enough. So I'll just rebuild the container. Now, I don't have Nix packages on that container yet, so I have to do a Nix channel update. This is another thing. This is why I like the separation between this imperatively declared container and the host system, because I can choose when I want to update the channel. So if I'm just making changes and I want to change a configuration option, I don't actually need to rebuild anything else. It will. I don't need to update the whole system, which could potentially change libraries, and I might have stuff compiled which depends on previous versions of the libraries or stuff like that. I just don't want to care about that until I decide I actually want to update the system itself. So yeah, so now I can do nixos rebuild switch. This will create this user that I've configured. It will enable, oh no, I didn't link the config file. Okay, so let me just yeah, what I wanted to do was link config containers screencast configuration, yep, to that. Yeah, so yeah, I just forgot to do that, so let's rebuild. Okay, typo, should be mutable users. Just to explain, all this stuff is in man configuration.nix. So if you look for users, mutable, you can see there's a description of how to use that option, and yeah, so I just misspelled it. Let's try that again. Hopefully I haven't. Oop, something else. Probably extra groups. Yes, indeed. Okay, that looks good. Let's just see if we have, yes, indeed, it's created the MW user. We can look at the services we have running. So for example, I can do status sshd. Interesting. That's a bit odd. I don't understand what that is. I'm pretty sure it is running though. Let me just log in to show that. So I'm going to add, on my host system, I'm going to add an entry to my .ssh config. Let's call it whatever, screencast. Oh yeah, I need the IP address of it. So nixos-container show IP and the name. That will tell me. It also spat that out when we first created it. So let's set that. I created the SSH key earlier. It's passwordless, and with a bit of luck that will work now. So if I do screencast, there we go. So I'm logged in as this MW user via SSH using the key that I specified in the config file. Yeah, so far so good. The next thing I want to do is add some more services. So I was thinking I would, I'm going to set up MediaWiki. So for that, first I'll just set up Apache. So that's the HTTPD service. Has quite a bit of configuration to do, so I'll put it in its own attribute set. Enable true. And also need to set an admin address. Just whatever. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and use the virtual hosts because I'm going to do some more stuff. Virtual hosts, yeah. By the way, in the wiki, the NixOS wiki, there's a whole section on how to set up MediaWiki. So that should be fine. You can basically copy and paste that if you do actually want to use this, but I'll just show you how to do it here. Just do a simplified version of it. So for starters, I'll just share the home directory of the MW user in this container. Okay, so call that screen home. Document root is home MW. Okay, I think I also need to close that section. Actually, I need to close. It's a list of hosts and an attribute set for HTTPD. Great, so let's rebuild. Yep. Unexpected. Yes, so this is a list. Shouldn't have a semicolon there. Yep. All right. Looks better. Okay, cool. So again, let's just check. I think it's called HTTPD as well. PD. Yeah, okay. And now I should already be able to access that by the IP address. So I'll open that up here. Cool, so this is the container, just to kind of prove that. I see I haven't stuck with my idea of using the theme here. I'll just switch that. Okay, so this is the MW user in the screencast logged in via SSH. So I'll just create a file there. And there we go. So that's Apache set up with virtual host and just a very simple config which serves the home directory. Okay, so far so good. Let's add the oh yeah, so before I can set up MediaWiki I need to have the database, and I'm going to use Postgres, so I'll just configure that service. Enable. Okay, you also need to tell it which version of Postgres to run. It's going to run 92. I think we have 93 as well, but that's what I tested with. I guess I don't need to show that, like I can rebuild now and I'll have Postgres. But there's some extra config that you also need to do, because when MediaWiki starts up the first time, it uses peer authentication to set up the tables and stuff. So to do that, you can configure it like this. This is also in the wiki. Okay, I think I'll just continue and set up MediaWiki, and we'll see. Hopefully that should all just work now. So we need another virtual host. Host name, I'll call it screen wiki. Don't care about the document root. The main thing is extra subservices. So there's already a subservice defined for MediaWiki. There's some other ones too, I think. So service type. Actually, the configuration options for this aren't visible in configuration.nix, but if you look in the Nix packages, NixOS modules, servers, web servers, I think something like that, you'll see all the subservices defined for Apache and the options. Maybe there's a way to browse through that some other way, but it's pretty easy to just read through the config file. Okay, set the name. With all these service modules, it just totally depends on the service which options are available. They have to be kind of manually coded into the module so that they're available. Sometimes we just have like an extra config section that you can copy and paste. Actually, this is what I'm going to add here, which kind of gives you full control over the configuration, but then you have to write it using whatever configuration language that particular service uses itself. So obviously it's PHP for MediaWiki. So I'm just going to have one option. This is also copied from the wiki here. I think this is probably enough. Yeah. So we close that extra subservice definition. And we close the, oh, sorry, we made the same mistake. Yep, and then we close that. I think that looks all right. Okay, so let's try that out. So, line 45. Oh. So right. I did the same thing. These are two items in a list, so you don't need semicolons between them. You can actually, there's a nice configuration example for MediaWiki in the configuration for the MediaWiki instance on nixos.org, which shows you how to add different extensions as well. So that's pretty nice if you do really want to set up MediaWiki. I don't actually use it so much myself, but I thought it would be a nice example to show the containers. For example, you might want to have test MediaWiki on two different versions of Postgres side by side. You could even mount the source code for your extension onto like your home directory somewhere, like some development directory you have in your host system, and run the two in parallel and check if there's any problems with them or migrations or whatever you want to test between them. And also if you want to add more systems, like you could configure OpenLDAP via this container, and you can do all that kind of testing. The nice thing, of course, is that you can just remove this container once you don't need it anymore, and it also doesn't interfere. Like each container has its own var DB with the database in it, for example. So there's no if you were to try to do this all on the host, you're going to have to like use different you're going to have to fiddle with the databases so they don't conflict and kind of manage that manually. So this is just makes life easier. Okay, cool. So again, I want to show you that we now have Postgres. Well, we have Postgres available and stuff now. But anyway, what I'll do is I'll go into my host configuration and add an extra host. Because we're using virtual hosts, I'll just use names for the for each of the virtual hosts, because we've got two things set up now. We've got we're serving the home directory, home MW, and we've also got a MediaWiki instance. So I'll just give them the names we specified. So if we see, so the host name is screen home, and the wiki is screen wiki. So okay, I'll go back to the shell on my home instance, my host instance, and I'll just rebuild that just to change the host configuration. Okay, and so instead of this, I can now use screen home, and to get into the wiki, I can use I think, yeah, okay. So the name of the wiki is my wiki. I forgot about that. I had that configured here. I could actually change that's the config so that it redirects. Pretty easy. You can just do, this is extra config for the virtual host. And let's just say redirect match. This is also in the default example on in the nixos wiki if I had set this up. So I can do that, for example. And okay, and now I should be able to just go directly to the root and it'll redirect me. Yep, perfect. So I hope that gives you an idea of what you can do with nixos-containers. For me personally, this is fantastic because it means, yeah, like it says in the documentation, you're sharing the processes, you're sharing the files in the file system, so it's actually absolutely the minimum overhead for having these containers, and they're nicely self-contained. They each has their own data, the database for each one, for example, if you're using Postgres or whatever. And for me as well, I typically don't, I do web development, but I don't do PHP so much. I do mainly Python, Plone, and that kind of thing. And we tend to have systems which use loads of different services, and it can be quite tedious to keep them all, to manage them all. So we have systems which use eJabber and OpenLDAP and Solar, which uses Java and bits of Ruby and NPM and everything, pretty much everything you can imagine. So it's so nice to be able to kind of configure everything that you need for this, and then and to manage it as well.